I want to start off with my man, Andrei Telezhenko. Andre was nice enough to join me this morning, and I deeply appreciate you joining me this morning. I'm going to do a monologue at 7:30, but I wanted to get you in first. Andrei Telezhenko is a Ukrainian whistleblower and former diplomat. How you doing, my man? You doing okay?
Good morning, Jamal. I'm doing perfectly fine. Thank you for having me on. It was good that
No,
we could connect to each other and find the time together to get this thing done because it's an important thing to you want to discuss today. So
yes, it is. So I am making an argument, and I will make the argument in more detail at 7:30. But I get the sense that the United States is tired of playing with its toys or its toy and is now trying to flush Zelensky down the toilet. This is taking place over Ukraine. Now, these protests have started, weirdly enough, as a result of Zelensky going after two organizations. What is it, NABU and SAPO? Effectively, these are
yeah,
supposed to be corruption organizations. I think it's NABU. Is it NABU or NABO? Let
Nabu
me look.
and
Okay,
Sapo.
good. NABU. These are corruption organizations, and I'm putting in quotes. Let's be honest, they were mostly run by the U.S. Embassy or by Europeans. They weren't necessarily under Ukrainian control.
Directed
And
by the FBI and Department of Justice, if you can be
exactly,
more complete.
thank you. That's more accurate. That's more specific. And they effectively came after the coup in 2014 when Yanukovych was overthrown in Ukraine. This was supposed to be the gateway to joining the European Union. And as I point out, these were not under the control of Ukraine itself. Now, Zelensky, as it is being put, started to get investigated, him and his circle of people, by these organizations, in which case Zelensky moved rapidly to get a bill which he signed into law to put these organizations under his office. I think they call it Office of the Protector General or Inspector General, but basically they're under Zelensky's office. And all of a sudden, people flipped out. People flipped out. Now, I don't know how many people even know these organizations exist. I have a hard time believing that a country that is corrupt, as Ukraine is under this government, all of a sudden freak out and come out. They're trashing Zelensky, they're trashing Yermak. Give me your take on this. What are your thoughts? I mean, you're a Ukrainian whistleblower. You point out the corruption, especially between the Biden administration and Ukraine, especially with the money that is going to Ukraine. And now people are losing their minds, supposedly, because I am very skeptical that this started organically, even though there may be a lot of people who ended up there organically after the AstroTurf. Give me your thoughts on this.
Not only I was part of the was the whistleblower, but I was advisor to the prosecutor general of Ukraine, knowing the inside what's happening with Nabu and how it was formed. It was formed on my eyes, basically ramped and through the Ukrainian throat to have these organizations formed. But at that time, that was the idea. We will not give you a tranche of money if you don't form Nabu and Sapo for Ukraine. So that was the result. George Kent and Ambassador Pyatt, they were doing involved in that, and Vice President Biden. They fully took control of these organizations and used them for their own purposes, directed to coordinate with the Department of Justice and the FBI, and to work against Ukraine, the country itself. Basically, they were not sovereign organizations. They're working not for Ukraine. They're working for Washington D.C., the deep state, etc. And I believe today the result is that Yermak Zelensky thought while Trump is fighting the deep state, he can use this opportunity to go against and destroy any opposition because these organizations within the government were opposition to Zelensky. They were supporting Poroshenko, Klitschko, that crowd. And Zelensky thought, why not remove them and use this opportunity? The pluses should override the minuses in this situation. So I think somebody gave them a bad idea of this. Somebody said, "Oh, the West is going to close their eyes on this. They'll continue, etc., etc. Just do it, and you'll benefit from this. You'll stay in power longer." That's why Zelensky did it. to stay in power longer. These organizations not only were responsible for investigating Zelensky's surrounding, but also they were feeding information to the opposition, and basically opposition within the government bodies, which had the little own armies, not only with government officials but also like SWAT teams, etc., which were were very well financed by the outside. That's one thing. This is about Naboo, Sapo, just in the short term. About these protests, we had 3 years of basically the dictatorship, terrorism by Zelensky. The borders are closed. People are dying on the border, being blown up on mines, shot by the border officers, drowned in lakes because they cannot cross those river lakes, mountain lakes, and rivers. Nothing happened. You have the busification, the throwing of people like dogs to the front lines. Your loved ones, fathers, sons, and brothers are caught on the street, like basically as like dogs and thrown to the bus and then sent to the front lines. Nothing happened. Today, you have this Naboo anti-corruption body, which Ukraine is the most corrupt country, and you have a protest against going against the anti-corruption bodies by who? Klitschko is there. Everybody who's on that protest, I saw the photos, are all those pro-Soros activists. I'm against those anti-corruption bodies. I am for that should be destroyed, but I'm also against Zelensky because Zelensky basically destroyed my country, Ukraine. And at the same
Yeah.
time, I'm for any protest that will overthrow Zelensky. They are spiders. These political parties from within Ukraine, they're going to destroy each other from within. Let them do that. And I'm for that. But the protests today, as I said, throughout the 3 years of dictatorship, illegal presidency, killing of people, throwing people to the front lines against their own will, nobody came out on the street. Even if some of the mothers of the dead soldiers who came out on the street, they were ramped up fast within 20 minutes. They didn't have a chance to stand on the street. Here, you have a well organized protest. It's a shakeup from the West. The West is shaking Ukraine. This might not lead directly to the Zelensky's destruction today or tomorrow, but this in Ukraine happens one or two, three big protests, and then you have the fourth one, which goes the coup, hits it hard, and that's how it works. It goes by the book, but this is a different situation in Ukraine today because so Zelensky, so are these other political figures within Ukraine are well coordinated from outside, and we'll see who wins. Today, basically, Soros and pro deep state Washington figures are on streets against Zelensky, and Zelensky is basically backed up by London, sitting in his office today. So this is what the reality is.
Yeah, I was fascinated by this because there were a few things. You get Seymour Hersh coming out with an article saying it's the end of Zelensky. You get coordinated other articles that came out going after Zelensky. And then you get Zelensky trying to solidify his power base in Ukraine, in Kiev. And then you get him raiding offices, like dozens of offices of Naboo and Sapo were effectively raided. And Zelensky was using the argument that Russia had infiltrated these corruption offices, and he had to go after the corruption offices in order to stop Russia's influence in these organizations. And it's like, hey, but it's super coincidental that they started investigating you and you started going after the organizations after they started investigating you and the people around you. And then, as I point out of the blue, as you made the point of saying, all of these people were dying, all of these people were getting thrown to the fronts. You had press gangs going after people left and right. Nothing. Quiet as a church mouse. At the moment Zelensky goes after Western, let's say, power brokers, protests spring up out of nowhere. Now, what's interesting to me is the coordinated articles that were all also coming out. I mean, for God's sake, you got article after article coming out going after Zelensky at the exact same time that the protests started to take place. So you get this one, editorial, Zelensky just betrayed Ukraine's democracy. You get another one, we know how to stand up for our rights, Ukrainian protest law threatening anti-corruption institution. You get this one from Politico. Meaning there are so many of these articles that have come out. Oh, I guess you couldn't see that one. You get this one from Politico. Anger bills as Ukraine Zelensky law targeting corruption watchdog. I don't know if I showed this one last time. We know how to stand up for our rights. Ukrainians protest laws threatening anti-corruption institution. I mean, you get another one saying Zelensky has betrayed Ukraine. You get various actors out of Ukraine going after Zelensky. It's rather amazing. And it seems super coincidental that all of it is happening at the exact same time. I want to show you a clip from Scott Ritter. I don't often say Ritter is right, but I want to get your take on whether you think Ritter is right here. This is him on Galloway. Listen to what he says. Because, by the way, I agree with you. I think this is the beginning of the end. I think this is them agitating, and the catch becomes how far does this agitation go?
Or he can die. Zelensky's on his way out. And again, I don't mean to be too harsh here, but he can either leave the old-fashioned way, which is on an airplane with a suitcase full of money going to one of the many mansions that he's bought with American taxpayer funds over the course of the past decade, or he can die on a cold slab, shirtless, with a bullet hole in his head. That's just the way it's going to be.
Give me your take on that. Is that the way you think this plays out?
Yes, I believe, but I think it's more leaning right now to the second part. He might die without not even getting out of Ukraine. He knows too much. People like that, that's why he's staying in power. He understands somewhere deep inside him that if he leaves Ukraine, like you have different cases around the globe that people don't like that don't live too long. But Berezovsky, for example, hung himself in the bath, and now he doesn't even have a gravestone 12 years later after he killed himself. So a billionaire from Russia, Berezovsky, a billionaire from Russia who was against Russia, supported by the West, trying to do the coup in Ukraine in 2004, trying to do a coup in Russia, blah blah blah. That guy, the oligarch from Russia, who basically not Russia killed him, but the West killed him. He knew too much. The same thing with Zelensky. He might go and live there for a while, but he doesn't have a standing chance to live until he's basically 100 years old. Is dying in his deathbed with grandchildren around him. No, so he has a bigger chance getting shot leaving Ukraine because nobody will let him leave with that kind of money on his hands.
Wait, real quick. I'm sorry to interrupt. You say he knows too much. What do you mean he knows too much?
The war started. How the war started, and how he agreed to start this war against the Russian Federation. How he basically was bought off by the MI6 to lure Ukraine into this war against the Russian Federation, knowing that they're not going to win on a battlefield, a nuclear nation like the Russian Federation. That's the reality. They were preparing for this war, and we talked about this on your show a couple of times, 2 years before the war even started. I was talking to people in the U.S. Embassy in Kiev. I was talking to former military officials who would come to Ukraine, meeting with the radicals in restaurants around Kiev, and they were preparing for something that will happen in Russia after some event. And this was 2 years before this. So Zelensky knew what he was up to. Zelensky sold off to Ukraine, and Scott Ritter also talked about this, how Zelensky sold out to the MI6. And I talked about this even before that. So this is what the reality is. He knows too much, so they will not let him out. And Zelensky understands it. Yermak understands it. So that's where they're trying to engage into building a structure that the West will not be able to topple them. They believe having the power they have right now, having all the oligarchs in place, having the whole system working for them, but they don't understand the reality is that they are there because of the West, because of the Western support. As soon as the Western support leaves Ukraine, if it ever does, if the West will say the Naboo are more important than the war, etc., even though I don't believe so, but they will not do it directly this way. They will try to manage it in a couple of protests and then hit Zelensky hard for him to leave at the end of the year. But if they do stop the financing, Ukraine will topple within a month because there's no payments to the government officials because we have no salaries. Everything's going from the outside. There's no economy in Ukraine. Ukraine is done. As a country doesn't exist. It exists only on paper. But if you take away every financial support from the outside of Ukraine, it's going to die really fast. So this Zelensky does not he believes in his own lies that he is powerful and much more powerful than Putin at the same time. So this is how bad the situation is, how deep the Ukraine is in trouble, and the Ukrainians are, because they let themselves into. They didn't believe that this. They believed the propaganda of the outside of Ukraine. Now they're facing the consequences. What will happen to Ukraine? I think the military will take over at one point. They will not let the politicians to take power, and I don't know if it's going to be Zelensky or somebody else, but it will also not last long because the military doesn't have the capability of micromanaging and managing the situation for a country for too far. Ukraine is not. It's a dictatorship as a terrorist state. It's a fallen state, but the military doesn't do a good job overriding a country. So, like Ukraine. So we'll see what's going to happen. But Zelensky's days are outnumbered, and then they are going far, far, far from what he expected to stay in power.
You say you think the military may even take over at a certain point. You mean like if
Yes.
the casualties get too high, their inability to stop the Russians that they've made?
Yes, I think they will not let the politicians. There's a game being played out in Ukraine, a couple of cards. That I said, there's a military intelligence who are against Zelensky. They're ready to back up people like from the Poroshenko side, but at the same time, they're not ready to back up Poroshenko himself.
Yeah.
That's on one point. So they believe that they will. What they want to do is they want to continue this war. They believe they understand they cannot win it, but they need to understand that they died for this country. They had basically they were put into this situation. They were given power, not just regular soldiers. I'm saying the management of the military. There's cases within the military intelligence that were coordinated from the Baltic states in Western Ukraine, like the Khmelnytsky, Ternopil military intelligence offices that are ready to go into Kiev any day. They were ready a year ago to do that. So they're waiting for their time. So something is happening. So it's being coordinated from not only from within Ukraine, but from the outside. Again, Ukraine now not being a sovereign state, every movement of protests or every coordinated move against the government is basically worked out, not from within Ukraine, but from forces outside of Ukraine, like the Baltic states, which are being used today by the deep state or London to go against the government or Washington even. So this is what has happened in Ukraine. No stability at all.
If not Zelensky, who? That's the part that confuses me. Like, let's say for the moment that Donald Trump gives 50 days. He knows he can't get anything out of Putin. And his thought is, okay, I need to push Zelensky. Zelensky is not going to be pushed. He's probably terrified for his life if he tries to stop the war. British, Europeans are backing him. And so the US puts pressure on him through protests with this notion of having a Maidan 2.0. He knows it. And so he decides, okay, I'm going to try to solidify power. And one of the ways he does it is going after these organizations, since these organizations that you point out are controlled by United States elements. The US at that point uses this as a pretext for this level of pressure that is being applied to him. If they want to get rid of him in order to, let's say, have somebody more malleable, who would they use for that? I don't know who they would use in the coup government that would be more malleable to Trump's wants.
Trump wants nobody within Ukraine. And the reality is, if Zelensky, yes, he's trying maybe to maneuver this, as I said, the same power, but also he'll be pressured to stop the war on the front lines where it is today. But we're forgetting about the factor, and everybody is always, mostly in the West, about Russia. Russia's moving forward. Russia doesn't need to stop on where it is right now. Russia asked to stop months before it started moving forward. Nobody
Yeah.
agreed to that. When the Istanbul, the first meetings happened, that was a possibility. Then it started moving too fast. It could have been stopped in 2022 also, but nobody did anything then. Today, Russia's moving actually really fast and pretty forward. They're taking over almost around 25 square kilometers per day, from 25 square kilometers per day, and within the month of June, they took over 580 square kilometers of territory. And this is pretty fast compared to how the strategy is, not to just basically, not as Israel comes into Gaza, destroys the shit out of everything, and then moves it forward, and then that's how. No, they're tactically moving forward, trying to they keep whatever's in there as much as possible because they understand who's going to rebuild it. They will, because that's going to be their brand. It's going to be their new territories. What how they're doing in LNR, DNR republics, and the new territories that were freed by Russia. So this is pretty. This is the reality that we have to understand. What Trump wants, what the situation is, what the reality is. You have to agree with Russia what they want. If you agree with Russia, and that there is a possibility, and there still is, for Trump to do that, to change the government, and bring in a neutral figure, somebody who can come in from to be the Speaker of the Parliament, because that's the only legitimate body Ukraine has today that will sign the peace deals with the Russian Federation, then reboot the system and basically go after any Nazism within the system within Ukraine, go against people like stop going against people who are Russian or the Russian
Yeah.
church, and start doing that, bring the law back to order, and start going for elections within a 6 to 8 month process, having real opposition involved, not just Poroshenko, Klitschko, and all the crowd, Timoshenko, who are controlled by the West. Like I said, Klitschko is a German citizen. Poroshenko basically works for the CIA, the deep state of Washington. He's not the loyalist to Trump team, to Trump world. So does Klitschko. They hate Trump. And anybody else in the political elites that are still in Ukraine, that are still viable in Ukraine, they're there because they're protected by the deep state or the MI6 or the CIA, who are working against the president Donald Trump.
Yeah.
So you need real opposition, who there is, which is outside of Ukraine, to be on the ballots, and that's the first a peaceful step for Ukraine to be left in a process where you bring in a neutral person to the Speaker of the Parliament, one of the members of Parliament today. He comes in for as they did after the coup with Turchinov. It's the West already used this situation, but it needs to be today agreed upon with Moscow how it's going to work out, because that's the only way out of this. You cannot leave Moscow out of these negotiations and these talks and do a coup against Zelensky and then say, "Oh, this is the new reality. There's going to be Poroshenko. He's going to continue the war because people supported him." If you want to do that, the U.S. is going to lose more and more. Ukraine is going to be lost, and Ukraine is going to be all freed by Russia, and it's going to be not just an independent state, because we're talking about the future of Ukraine, most of it, not just the regions that were freed by the Russian forces, but Kiev and parts of even Western Ukraine. It can be still an independent state in Odessa. It can still be an independent state, but working closely with Russia and Minsk and China and also the EU, no problem. But it can be an independent state, but it's going to be loyal to Moscow rather than Washington. But if this continues, Ukraine will be then not as an independent state, but as a part of a region, a couple of regions, part of Moscow or part of Russia directly, and not being independent at all, because that's the Russian forces will take over and free all those regions by force, which
Yeah.
nobody wants to do, and that's what the Washington is pushing for.
Last question. Do you see that the Rada agreed to the Naboo and Sapo law? So if they're agreeing to the law, and just to be clear, Ukraine is not wrong in this case. I mean, these organizations that are external to Ukraine that are effectively controlling, or at the very least influences the politics of Ukraine. So I'm not making the argument that they're wrong. But the fact that so much pressure is being applied to Ukraine from Europe, the US, internally, and the parliament, the Rada, still said, yes, we agree with the law. Does that mean that there is anybody in the Rada that could take over, that will be a neutral figure?
There's more neutral figures than others within the Rada. Like as we're talking about Timoshenko as an option, she could basically be one of those neutral figures that can, in her basically last years of political cycle, she can save the country by being that neutral figure that would lead Ukraine to elections.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that she can be the new, she will be, or I support her as the new leader of Ukraine. No, she can be the neutral figure from within both sides, Russia and Washington, as leading. That's an option as a strong figure that could take this situation in hands and lead Ukraine to elections, and then have real elections with opposition, with people with open borders, that people can come back to Ukraine, not be get all the political prisoners freed, etc., etc. All that situation basically turn the page of what happened under the Zelensky dictatorship and start a new page for Ukraine. That's an option. She came out and did not support Nabu and Sapu on the situation because that's the reality. Is a lot of people in Ukraine do not support those organizations. I do not support them. There were. I knew the head of Nabu, Artem Sitnik, who was in Washington in the meeting with the Russia hoax when it all started. I was there and I saw how these heads of the prosecutors, the special anti-corruption prosecutor Holodnitsky, the head of Nabu, Artem Sitnik, were like dogs in front of a cookie in front of the National Security Council in the White House, saying, "Yes, we will do whatever you tell us to do." Basically, the Department of Justice were ramming words into their mouth while they were talking and negotiating with the National Security Council. The FBI was telling them what to say right during the conversation, during the meeting. So this is what it was: a very unsovereign body, which basically led Ukraine to lose its sovereignty, and the corruption from outside of Ukraine led Ukraine to war today. Because what happened is corruption led by Biden and everybody else reared Ukraine to be more and more corrupt. So I supported the destruction of Nabu. I do not support what Zelensky is doing because he's doing it for himself, not for the country. That's a different situation. So whatever Timoshenko said today while the vote, that's what a lot of people do come out and talk about. They do not support these organizations. But at the same time, as I said, the parliament is very loyal to Zelensky. The parliament is afraid because there's tap wires and files by the Zelensky government on everybody within the Ukrainian parliament today that can be used against them. Some of them parliamentarians I know that who were in opposition before. They were captured at the beginning of the conflict and they were tortured. Some of them by the security service of Ukraine, and that's how they became loyal to the regime. So there's a lot of cases, but as soon as it starts crumbling, half of the Rada will run away. I will tell you, a lot of people, a lot of those pro Soros guys within the Rada, within the Zelensky team, they will run away from Ukraine. The ones who will stay, I said, this already Ukraine went through this in 2014. It can be played by the book if you want to do it the most easy way in the situation to save a country. If the West, because the West right now can save Ukraine from total destruction or from the total annihilation, and then we'll easier for us to rebuild it. But if they will go the path to totally destroy Ukraine just to make Moscow pay for this, because it's going to be under Russian territory anyway, and somebody will have to rebuild it. And just to make Moscow pay for this more and waste more money, and they don't care about the people. We know that they don't care about the people, but that's going to be the face of the West. Totally, we'll have in the future. Ukraine will never have really good relationship with anybody in the West if they do this.
Andre, thank you for this. Really great breakdown. Really, I mean, fantastic. Andrei Telizhenko, he is a Ukrainian whistleblower, former diplomat. He was there when all of this started, and I appreciate him joining me this morning for his analysis. You have a safe day, man. Be safe.
Thank you, Jamal. All the best to you. All the best to your viewers and listeners. God bless.
Thank you. All right, Andre, it's fantastic. Great breakdown of what is taking